Yo, what's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin Forte, and it is time for our Week 6 NHL Power Rankings. It was a big week in the NHL. Obviously, happy Thanksgiving to all of you guys. I hope it was good for you guys. And now that we are finishing up with Black Friday, we are just getting ready into the holiday season. And now it's time to really take a look, because now we are pretty much at the quarter mark of the NHL season. We're through the first quarter, and we're going to get a better idea of, at this point, the teams that are in the top 16, more likely than not, those teams will be in the playoffs come April, as crazy as that sounds. So this is an important power ranking, so we're going to be going over that today. So the first two teams and a couple of teams in this, there's a little bit of controversy about the reason they are where they are, and based off of purely the statistics and the way they've been playing, it's pretty obvious to see why they are where they are. But you also have to look at the bigger picture that COVID has pretty much blasted a couple of teams in the NHL, and it is really frustrating to watch these teams get destroyed by the COVID protocols by the NHL and just injuries overall. So those three teams, we will talk about them in a second. The first two, shockingly enough, are at the bottom of our power rankings. Isn't that interesting? They basically, half their team is blown up and they're at the bottom of the rankings, right? So at number 32 is the Ottawa Senators, and I haven't watched much of the Senators this week. They're 1-8-1 in their past 10 games, and they're currently on a 3-game losing streak, not to mention the fact that they are still missing players from COVID, and they're still coming back from that. Now, they did have a couple of games postponed, which I think helped them just a little bit, but this team was banged up coming back, and this team was banged up going into the postponements. Definitely a tough spot right now for the Ottawa Senators as they find themselves toward the bottom of the NHL standings and at the absolute bottom of our power rankings. Now, number 31 is even more frustrating because you guys know I am a New York Islander fan, and they are currently on the longest losing streak in the NHL. They are currently on a 7-game losing streak and 2-7-1 in their past 10 games. The NHL is really screwing the New York Islanders right now, and I'm probably going to have to make a video about that at some point this weekend. But this is absolutely ridiculous. 5 of the Islanders' 6 top pairing defensemen, 5 of their 6 starting defensemen are out right now. Ryan Pulock out with injury, and the rest of them are out with COVID. Absolute horse crap. This is ridiculous. I don't know what the NHL is going to do to fix this. But it just so happens the two teams that start off our power rankings are teams that have gotten blasted by this COVID non-postponement, really. At least the Ottawa Senators had a couple games postponed. It doesn't look like the Islanders are going to get anything. And that is absolutely ridiculous. Now, number 30 here is the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens just purely move up because these two teams were unfortunately worse. Really not to their own fault, but the Montreal Canadiens move up. They're 2-6-2 in their past 10 games. They've been nothing really to write home about. And I have a video coming out this weekend. You guys should check that out, my Habs fans, because let's put it nicely, the Montreal Canadiens in my lottery, they favored in that lottery with Shane Wright. So make sure to check out that video this weekend. A little plug there. But the Montreal Canadiens, they sit at 30, but again, this is the team that they're going to make some moves. And I don't know what's going to happen with Bergevin and everything else, but the Habs are going in the wrong direction right now for all the wrong reasons. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some change there. Maybe they add another defenseman with what draft picks. I'm not really sure, but they have to do something. At number 29 is the Arizona Coyotes. They've had a couple of nice, feel-good stories here over the past couple weeks. They've won 4 of their past 10 games. They're actually picking up some points. They picked up 9 out of a possible 20 points in that 10-game stretch. I know that's nothing to really be that excited about, but considering how the Coyotes had started through the first really dozen games of the season, it's nice to see them actually winning a couple of games. They've actually been one of the better teams this week. For the Seattle Kraken at number 28, they move up again purely because other teams were worse. So They went from last in our power rankings last week to now moving up a couple of spots, moving up 4 spots. They are currently on a 2-game winning streak from last week when they were on that big losing streak. They're 3-7 in their past 10 games, nothing really great, but they're still staying at the bottom. They're not this 2-game winning streak, if it becomes a 5 or a 6-game winning streak, we maybe move, talking about maybe a little bit of optimism and putting themselves back in the playoff picture. Not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but back in the picture, at least competitive in that division. That division's been a little bit more difficult than I think they were anticipating, and it's made it really difficult for the Kraken, and they just can't seem to hang on with some of those other teams in their division. At number 27 is the Buffalo Sabres. Yeah, the Sabres are kind of where we thought they would be, and that early season success has definitely worn off for the Sabres. They're 2-7-1 in their past 10 games. They're currently on a 4-game losing skid. So things in Buffalo have definitely turned the other way in the worst possible way. They had a weird game against the Rangers earlier this week. I love the resilience from the Sabres. This is a team going to the Garden on I think it was a Sunday night game. You're not supposed to win that game, and they just stuck around. I hate to say it, Aaron Dell was not good for the Sabres. There were multiple times where the Sabres needed a save from Aaron Dell, especially in that second period, and they just didn't get it from him. And it ended up being a toss-up game in overtime, and there you go. The better team ends up winning in the New York Rangers. So Buffalo, definitely signs of improvement, and I love the young guys they have there. But there is definitely a pattern of things could grow thin very quickly in that Sabres organization for even some of those young guys. Tage Thompson, shout out to him. He's actually looked pretty good over the past couple of weeks. He had a really nice November. At number 26 is the Vancouver Canucks. As miserable as things have been in Vancouver, there's actually teams worse than the Canucks right now. The Canucks are currently on a 2-game losing streak and very similar record to the Sabres. They're on a little skid too. They're 2-7-1 in their past 10 games as well. Vancouver, it's the same issues over and over again, and we're starting to hear some trade chatter about potentially their captain Bo Horvat. Brock Besser's name has been thrown out there. There is going to be some change in Vancouver. I don't necessarily know what kind of move they're going to make. There's been some talk about JT Miller over the past couple of days. We're going to go over all of that this weekend in a video, but the Vancouver Canucks, things may be worse than we first thought. So keep an eye out for that video this weekend. Now, number 25 is the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks are starting to turn things around. This could be a really nice turnaround story in the NHL. I know, it's still the end of November. They still find themselves bottom 10 in the NHL standings, but the Chicago Blackhawks are 6-4 in their past 10 games, and they've been winning and losing and winning and losing, but they've been doing more winning than losing, which at the end of the day can lead to some success. Now, they have to really bury themselves from a really tough start they had, but with all those distractions of Stan Bowman and everything else going out the window, I really like what I've seen here from the Chicago Blackhawks. A totally different looking team, and they still have some distractions. This whole thing with Dylan Strome, Marc-Andre Fleury struggling out of the gate, he seems to be fitting in a little bit better. So there's definitely a little bit more optimism in Chicago, but there's still some concerns. Seth Jones is still making some critical mistakes in games that I've seen, and stuff like that does wear thin. That game in Edmonton last week. So again, this is one of those teams, I call them the Jekyll and Hyde team. They go onto the ice, and you could see a team that looks like a playoff team one night, and then the second night of that back-to-back, they could look like number 32 in our power rankings within a 2-day span. That is one of those teams in Chicago, and that's the record is kind of reflecting that. But they are starting to move their way upward, and they aren't one of the tire fires of the NHL at this very point, which I guess is something to be a little bit more excited about. Now, the LA Kings are not doing well. I've made the mistake twice of moving them into the top 10 after a nice winning streak. Well, they're back on a 5-game losing skid. They are one of the streakiest teams here to start this NHL season. They just have not seemed to be able to just string wins. I'd rather the team that can win, 2 every 3 games than obviously, but you'd rather that, even if you win 2 of every 5 games, that's still better than, losing 7, winning 5, losing 8, winning 3. Like, very streaky teams do not do well in the NHL. And I think this is part of the youngness of this LA Kings team. And they still have some veterans, Anze Kopitar, Dustin Brown. But they're still without some big defensemen. Sean Walker out for the season, and Drew Doughty probably not returning till 2022. So there is some genuine concern that this blue line needs help. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the LA Kings go out on the market and look for another defenseman. I think with this current losing streak, it's pushing the pencil a little bit more toward that direction. But I think the LA Kings at this point have to make some kind of move. The goaltendings look pretty solid, though, which is good. But again, there's still some concern about the lack of consistency of in between the pipes, and that's been put on display this year. So we got a couple losing streaks here. Continuing on with the LA Kings, at number 23 is the Philadelphia Flyers, another very streaky team to start this season. The first month of this power rankings, they were a top 10 team in our power rankings most of the way. And then they went on that losing streak and have never really gotten back to that form really now for almost a month. And that is a little bit concerning here for the Philadelphia Flyers. There's just some little things about them. I think that game last week against Boston really exemplified where the Flyers are at. They're not even, that team that's a pretty good team that could get in. They don't really look like that right now. And all the moves they made to fix up that defense this past summer, they're seeing the same problems again, just different guys on the back of the just different names on the back of the uniform. It's the same story in Philadelphia, and it's really hard to watch. But I don't know what you do at this point. They've got some young guys they can call up, but again, injuries and stuff like that, it has really hurt the Philadelphia Flyers. So we'll keep an eye on them. Now, number 22 is the Winnipeg Jets. I was very high on them early in this season. They're on a 4-game losing streak right now. All that great stuff about Pierre-Luc Dubois and Connor Hellebuck and Kyle Connor at the beginning of the season, that is all pretty much worn off at this point for the Winnipeg Jets. They are not that team right now. A very inconsistent team. They can score goals when they want to, but they don't score goals all the time. And that's been part of the problem for the Jets. Their defense has definitely gotten better, but there's still some flaws in their game. And a couple of injuries. Again, injuries really make a big difference. And they're one of those teams that has gotten hit with that. Now, at number 21, talking about injuries, and this is the third COVID team I have to talk about in my little rant. It's the St. Louis Blues. Blues fans, I didn't forget about you guys. You guys have taken a beating from the COVID situation. I understand that. And just like the Islanders and the Senators, at least your fate is slightly better than those teams. And that's why I have them still a little further up in the power rankings, because I really do genuinely think they are still a pretty good team. The Islanders and the Senators, I wasn't sold on them before their situation, and it's just gotten more amplified, and now they just find themselves, rock bottom in the standings. But St. Louis, I think there's more optimism with this team, and I think they're just starting to come out of it. I think, give them till Christmas time. At the end, going into next year in 2022, give it another 2 or 3 weeks. I think we can see the St. Louis Blues really start to move their way back up into our power rankings, maybe back into the top 16 as soon as next week. We'll see how things go there in St. Louis. Now, the next couple of teams have been just, they're mediocre from 20 to 18. And at number 20 is the New Jersey Devils. They just released those very awful jerseys that I do not like. I posted that video yesterday. Make sure to check that out. But yeah, the New Jersey Devils, again, another team riddled with a couple of tough injuries early on, and that kind of stuff just throws you off. And especially early in the season, you lose that momentum, you lose that little bit of mojo, and that really hurts. And I think the New Jersey Devils, who are still a young team, they don't have a ton of depth. Some of the guys they lost, like Jack Hughes, and especially Mackenzie Blackwood, that's going to hurt, losing your starting tendy. So I think they've done fairly well without those guys. But they really need to get more support from some of the other guys. And shout out to Dawson Mercer, Yegor Sharangovich. They've played really well in the absence of guys like Jack Hughes. So there is some confidence building going on in New Jersey, and they're definitely taking the right steps in the right direction. It's just being more consistently on those winning streaks, and that's going to take time. This is a very young team. They do have some older guys, but the maturity level still has to grow within this group. At number 19 is the Nashville Predators. They're kind of where I thought they would be, but they haven't been anything spectacular. Their record is pretty good when you look at 10-game stretches. They've been winning more than losing, really, other than those first 10 games of the year. In 10-game batches, I really like the consistency of John Hines' team in Nashville, and I wouldn't have been that confident about that, in the preseason. I was not sold on the Nashville Predators, but they got a good goalie in UC Saros. They have some guys that can score. Ryan Johansson, Matt Duchene are putting up points, and it's just enough for the Nashville Predators to skate by right now, but you can only hide that center issue for so long, and some of their issues on the depth side of things could start to catch up with them as the season goes along. In Central Division, actually, that's actually looking pretty decent right now with teams like Chicago all of a sudden on the rise, Dallas starting to come up, Colorado, and then St. Louis is still in the mix. And then you still have Nashville. So it's more of a arms race between all 5 of those teams. But there's definitely something to be said about that division and the Winnipeg Jets, like I just mentioned. At number 18, the Detroit Red Wings. Again, another team like New Jersey where, they show glimpses of just pure greatness, and then the next night they'll play terrible. Very similar are New Jersey and Detroit. Young teams that play well against teams like Tampa, and then they'll struggle the next night against the Seattle Kraken. It doesn't really make much sense, but these two teams are very similar. I like the direction they're going in. And they may be dark horse teams for getting into the playoffs in a couple of months from now. So, seeing the emergence of some of the young guys in Detroit has been absolutely amazing. And as this team continues to grow, continues to get better, I like the projections of the Detroit Red Wings moving forward. Now we're starting to move up into the more elitist categories, moving up into the top 16. Very shortly. At number 17, just on the outside of that looking in, is your Dallas Stars. And the Dallas Stars have really impressed me over the past month. I think November was a good month for the Stars. They're currently on a 2-game winning streak. They're 5-4-1 in their past 10 games. And they've shown, again, another team that is very hot or cold in any given night. And that's the thing with Dallas that bothers me, and that's why they aren't further up. But I really think this is a team that has potential, especially in that Central Division, to make the playoffs. I think it's so wide open right now in the Central. I think Dallas, despite that kind of slow start, can still find their way back into the conversation. They're one of the best teams in terms of special teams, power play, and penalty kill. So there is some optimism there in Dallas. And again, another dark horse team to potentially get into that Sweet 16 come playoff time in April. Now, moving up into the top 16, I might be getting myself ready for another letdown here, but at 16, we're heading to the Steel City in Pittsburgh as the Pittsburgh Penguins, all of a sudden, Sidney Crosby, Sid the Kid comes back, and the Penguins are all of a sudden on a 4-game winning streak. They're 5-3-2 in their past 10 games. And starting to get that mojo we were talking about earlier, now that they've got some guys healthy. They got some swagger, they got some depth. And you know what? The winning the hockey games thing, that doesn't hurt either. So the Pittsburgh Penguins, we'll see how long this lasts. They're at 500 overall in their last 10 games, but there's definitely a different vibe right now with Crosby in the lineup. This team definitely changes a whole lot. They're a lot harder to play against, a lot harder to match up against, and we're starting to see Pittsburgh take advantage of having Crosby back. And once Malkin comes back, man, this could be a team here in the second half of the season to really watch out for. And you have a healthy Crosby and a healthy Malkin coming in. This could be a real threat once again in that again, very tough Metro division. And that's really the knock on this team is, can they get in with that bad start? Because the rest of the Metro is just so good. Now, at number 15 is the Anaheim Ducks, and talk about dealing with heartbreak. I can't deal with this anymore. The LA Kings and the Anaheim Ducks will go on 10-game winning streaks, and then they'll lose 7 or 8 in a row after that. It is so frustrating watching those California teams, and again, that's the inconsistency, and talk about, the maturity. There's a lot of young guys in Anaheim. Troy Terry, his unbelievable goal-scoring streak came to an end. And what did I say last week? When these teams go on their losing streaks, will they be able to bounce back after that one loss? And they haven't done it. LA's on a 5-game losing streak since. The Ducks are on a 3-game losing streak since. I don't know what to tell you. I told you what it is, but they just couldn't figure it out. And it's easier said than done. I understand that, but extremely frustrating right now for those California fans right now watching those teams. Now, at number 14, a team that, again, wasn't talked about much, and I kind of see them as I guess you could say the Devils of the Atlantic Division, because everybody seems to be forgetting about the Boston Bruins for some reason. Just because they lost Krejci and Rask, everybody seems to be forgetting about them. And they're currently have 7 wins in their past 10 games, and they look like a very confident, boisterous bunch. Now, this game against the Rangers, they didn't look great in that game, but there is definitely optimism in Boston right now. As long as that goaltending can hold up, and they can score just enough goals from the perfection line and get just enough depth scoring, the Boston Bruins, man, I see a really good season for the Bruins here when everybody sees them missing the playoffs, kind of including myself. I'm iffy on them making the playoffs, but if you get enough from guys like Charlie Coyle, I know Jake DeBrusk is kind of on the trade block, kind of on his way out, Taylor Hall, Coyle, those guys, as long as they could add some depth scoring, Thomas Nosek, some of those guys they added this summer, I like the odds of the Boston Bruins even beating out some of those teams in that division. And it's going to be tough because, like I said, you have Florida, you have Tampa, you have Toronto. There's some good teams there. And it's going to be you have to feast on the guys below you. You have to feast on Ottawa, Montreal, Detroit. You have to beat those teams if you want to get into the playoffs here, especially right now, if you are the Boston Bruins. So we'll see what happens. Now, number 13, lucky number 13, they've been here a couple weeks ago, and my boy Shaka, shout out to you, big Sharks fan there out on the West Coast. Yeah, they're back in the top 15. They are number 13 on our power rankings. They are currently on a 2-game winning streak, but they have kind of had their issues along the way, a little bit of inconsistency, but I've liked what I've seen from the Sharks. Again, James Reimer's incredible start to the season. Definitely shocked most people in the hockey world, especially myself included. He has really done well there in San Jose and has given some optimism here to the Sharks. Again, adding some swagger, but now this Evander Kane stuff is coming out again, adding another distraction. So we'll see how the Sharks are able to handle that off-ice stuff now as we kind of deal with more of those distractions, as nobody's really been talking about him, and the Sharks have kind of just done their thing. So we'll see what happens. Now, number 12, I can't believe I'm talking about the Blue Jackets here on the top 16. I really thought they were going to be a bottom 5 team. You traded Seth Jones, you traded Dubois last year. What would be left of this team? Well, apparently a lot. And everybody that kind of counted them out, including myself, kind of eating crow right now. They're currently 7-2-1 in their past 10 games on a 2-game winning streak. The Blue Jackets have been really consistent. They had about 2 weeks where they were they're kind of coming back down to earth, but they seem to be feeding off that energy from the beginning of the year that they had. Obviously, everything with Kivlenix, they've seemed to be just feeding off that energy and building off of that throughout the year. And I think they're kind of using that, that underdog, nobody thought we would make it mentality and taking it to the nth degree and using it to their advantage. Congrats there to Brad Larson, the new head coach there in Columbus. He's done a really nice job, and obviously shout out to Jarmo Kekalainen with some of the offseason moves he made. Everybody was kind of scratching their head. He seems to be doing a really nice job at this point. Now, at number 11, we go back to the Western Conference, specifically the state of hockey. The Minnesota Wild have been one of the most interesting teams in the NHL to start the year, and it's not because of where they're ranked in our power rankings, it's the way they finish hockey games. You always talk about, it's almost a cliche. It's you find ways to win. And the Minnesota Wild are the quintessential example of that. This is a Minnesota Wild team that has been down in Florida, in Tampa, and back-to-back nights by multiple goals, and they pull the goaltender with 3 or 4 minutes left, and they find a way to score 2 or 3, maybe 4 goals to win that hockey game. That is the kind of resiliency, that's the kind of energy we have not really seen from the Minnesota Wild under the Zach Parise and Ryan Suter era. And that's nothing against those guys as players. I absolutely adore them as players. They were really nice hockey players, especially considering one of them's on my New York Islanders. But the new direction of the Wild has really given this team the reset they've needed. And the goaltending's been good enough. It's been shaky, of course. Cam Talbot has his moments, but he's been good enough. And this team, just the way they play some of these games is really entertaining to watch the Minnesota Wild. If you can't not watch a game. If the Wild are down 5-1 with 10 minutes to go in the third period, you better keep your ass on the couch and watch the rest of that game, because the Minnesota Wild just might surprise you and end up winning that hockey game. They're kind of becoming the cardiac Wild, because they are just finding ways to stay in a game. Even when they're completely out, they still find a way to win that game, or at the very least pick up points in overtime. But they haven't even been settling for that. They've been settling for the dubs. They want the victories, and they have been able to do that. So really, they are just on the outside of the top 10, but I really like what I have seen from the Minnesota Wild. All right, and the Islanders lose again. So make that an 8-game losing streak there, Islanders fans, and Pittsburgh wins again. They win 1-0 over the Islanders. Nice. Nice little update here to wrap up our power rankings. So now moving into the top 10 is the New York Rangers. So the New York Rangers are 6-2-2 in their past 10 games. They've looked pretty solid for the most part. They've obviously had their little blips, but they just find a way to win. And that's really it. Again, kind of different than Minnesota, but they're finding ways to win. And it's not as pretty necessary or as entertaining as the Minnesota Wild, but they're very aggressive, very gritty. They have a lot more power, and I didn't like what Lafreniere did to Pajot the other day. I know he had the hit on Lindgren before that, but to wipe his skates out from under him, and then while he's down on the ice, kind of grabbing him from the back, I didn't like that from Lafreniere. Not really the kind of stuff you want to see, and he better watch, because the Islanders are playing the Rangers again Sunday night. I would just be more careful, because he's a young kid. He might get his face punched in. If I know anything about Matt Martin and Ross Johnson potentially being back, I would keep my head up if I was Alexi Lafreniere the rest of the season against the Islanders. Just a thought. But sometimes you got to learn, right? You got to learn by touching the hot stove or maybe getting a fist through your face. So we'll see what happens. Now at number 9 is the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning are turning around. 7-1-2 right now is their record in their past 10 games. It's a lot more, juju going on in Tampa Bay. I don't know what those pregame music playlists have changed up a little bit. They got some bangers going on down there in the locker room, but they seem to be having a different vibe than what we saw early on. And again, you got to remember, they have a lot of younger guys on the roster taking up the third and fourth line, and it seems like those guys are seemingly getting more comfortable and getting adjusted to the point where they can play some good hockey, and that's what we're seeing from them right now. And the next couple teams we're going to talk about actually are teams that kind of struggled out of the gate through the first month, and all of a sudden the past 2-3 weeks since Halloween, these teams are all of a sudden finding themselves just steadily creeping their way, ever so stealthily crawling through the grass into the top 10, and Tampa's one of those teams. Another one of those teams is at number 8, and that's the Vegas Golden Knights. They're 7-3 in their past 10 games, and they've got guys back healthy. They are no longer the Henderson Silver Knights playing at T-Mobile Arena. The Henderson Silver Knights are playing in their beautiful new arena down the road. The Golden Knights are back, and they are back and better than ever. And that vibe has totally changed since the Jack Eichel trade. I keep saying that, but I do really mean that. This is a totally different team in Vegas right now. Robin Lehner's playing great. He's just doing what he has. He's doing what he's always done. And they're just finding ways to get dubs. And Laurent Brossoit has been able to come in and play well also. But I really like the Golden Knights. they just seem more in sync now that everybody's back on the roster. And you don't have guys like Pietrangelo overcompensating, making, bad decisions because he's just trying to push the play forward when he doesn't need to. It ends up hurting your team more when you do that. But it seems like things have kind of stabilized again in Vegas. Another team, again, talking about stealthily just crawling through the weeds, finding their way back into the top 10. It's the Colorado Avalanche here at number 7. So the last 3 teams are teams we were talking about very highly, going into the season. And at points, they were out of the top 16, all 3 of these teams. Colorado is 8-1-1 in their past 10 games. They currently hold the longest win streak in the NHL at 6 games right now. The Avalanche they're getting it going. Jared Bednar just signed that contract extension to stay in Colorado. The Avalanche have kind of turned on a dime, and this is really exciting for Avs fans. This is the team that they wanted to see early on. So if they have their little bump in the beginning of the year, nobody cares. If you go out the rest of this season, I know there's a lot of hockey left, you play consistent hockey the rest of the way, the Colorado Avalanche will definitely be a favorite to win that Stanley Cup. And again, now that you got guys back healthy, maybe those losses from the summer, they were able to hopefully fix some of those issues and address things to where those aren't as big of losses. And we're kind of seeing that right now. Darcy Kemper, shout out to him. He has really come in and helped solidify in between the pipes in the absence of Philip Grubauer. All right, so just on the outside of the top 5, at number 6 is the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the Maple Leafs are 8-2 in their past 10 games. They're on a 2-game winning streak. And some people may say, what the hell? Why are they not in the top 5? This and that. There's teams that are just having more consistency, and that's why they're ahead of the Leafs. So if the Leafs continue where they're at, they're going to be probably a top 4 team next week. I think there's a gap between, 3 and 4, and I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto could find themselves going that way if they just continue to do what they've been doing. But they had that big win against the Islanders. You knew they wanted that game. I don't want to talk about the Leafs right now. It's frustrating, but they're playing great hockey. I have to give them credit for that. They just seem bigger, not afraid of their opponent playing on the perimeter. They're pushing the play in. Almost, you saw William Nylander looking like a power forward driving to the net. That's not the kind of stuff you prototypically see from Marner. We've seen it from Matthews, but guys like Marner, Nylander doing that, it's really something that is very novel in Toronto, and I think the Leafs fans are pretty happy seeing that little bit of a bruised up nose from some of those guys that are more known as quote-unquote perimeter players. They are not playing that way right now, and it's really, really nice to see. And Marner's not always getting the goals, but he's just seemingly getting the opportunities. He's getting himself where he's in opportunities to score the goals. He just has to have more finish, and I think that will come in time as he gets that touch, as he gets more confident. That's only going to grow for him. And at number 5 here, now moving into the top 5, it's the Calgary Flames at 5. They're 6-2-2 in their past 10 games. They're on a 4-game winning streak that started last Saturday against the Islanders. I know somebody in my comments last week said, you watched, my Flames kick your Islanders' ass and you didn't move them up further than 13. Well, here you go, because honestly, they have looked that good, and I think it is well-deserved. Jacob Markstrom, I think, what does he have, 6 or 7 shutouts at this point? He has been incredible for the Flames. His turnaround story has been great post-surgery last year. Really nice story there. You're seeing the guys like Mangiapane put up points. You're seeing this team just do what we expect the Flames to do. And honestly, I had the Flames as the team that was going to probably tear everything down next summer. And all of a sudden, they seem to be on the right track and finally getting wins. And I was worried that losing some leadership, over the last couple of years, losing guys like Hamonic a couple years ago, losing TJ Brody, losing Mark Giordano, that I wasn't sure how much leadership they would have in the room. It seems like guys have stepped up in their place and really taken that role. And shout out to Blake Coleman, because I was worried about him being kind of a bust signing for the Flames. He's been really good for the Flames, low-key, and I think he's a guy that can help them on their projections of maybe getting to the playoffs this year. Maybe, just maybe beating out Edmonton and winning that Pacific Division. We'll see what happens. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I've definitely liked what I've seen. That little blip, 2 weeks ago has kind of soured away for the Flames, and really good stuff. Now, at number 4, I'm wearing their jersey today. It's the Washington Capitals. The Capitals have been good, 7-2-1. They're steadily doing their thing. They've really stayed in the top 15 throughout all of our power rankings here to start the year through the first 2 months. And I've really liked what I've seen from Ovechkin. The goaltending seems to be stabilizing a little bit more. Some of the young guys are getting opportunities on the back end. Martin Fairvey looking pretty good, seeing him in little glimpses here and there. Obviously the Hershey Bears player. I like seeing those guys succeed in the NHL. Maybe not with the Capitals, but I like seeing them succeed. So it's nice seeing those guys play well. Connor McMichael still in the lineup for the Caps. So definitely some good things for the Capitals to continue to build on. And I think they're really doing a great job. And everybody that said, Ovechkin's done and this core is aging and getting older, they're just continuing to win and prove people wrong. Really nice to see that from the Capitals. All right, so now we move up into the top 3. At number 3, staying where they've been now for pretty much 2 months, is the Edmonton Oilers. And I know Oilers fans are probably thinking, man, why can't we move up? But I really do think there is a gap between them and those top 2 teams still. And I was debating last week about moving them up, but at this point, I just think those 2 teams are just too good. And Edmonton is still, there's enough gap between them and Washington at 4, but it's closing. And I think Edmonton, they're still playing very well. They're, I think, best power play in the league, second best penalty kill in the league. They've been really good. But again, this is a team that we knew that it's almost like this is where they were supposed to be. So we're not talking about them as much because, well, you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and you brought in Zach Hyman, so you should be this good. But we also have to remember, Mike Smith was, out injured. Koskinen had to come in and kind of fix things up. Stuart Skinner looked awful in his first couple starts this year. And here are the Oilers, still 6-4. And what is seemingly a bad stretch for the Oilers, they're still playing some really good hockey. So nice to see that there with the Oilers. All right, so now we get back to the top 2. It's always a discussion who's going to be 1, who's going to be 2, because every week it seems to be flipping back and forth. It's like a seesaw, and that's no different this week. We have a new number 1 team. It was the team that was first 2 weeks ago in our power rankings, and I think a couple weeks before that even. At number 1 is the Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers regained the top spot. And the reason for that is they are 6-2 in their past 10 games. They're currently on a 4-game winning streak, and they've been playing some good hockey, really good hockey, in fact. Even despite that game against Minnesota, they seemingly are, they've regrouped, and they've done really well. Sergei Bobrovsky seems to be healthy from his injury, and this team just, even with guys getting injured, they just seem to get it done. Oh, shout out to Ryan Lomberg, got another extension. Nice to see that, $800K. I'm sure he'll be taking that to the bank with no complaints. But nice to see the depth sticking around in Florida, and everything that's kind of gone wrong for the Panthers this year, they're still where they are. They lose their head coach when they, haven't lost a game like almost a dozen games into the season. Then they go on that long, almost week without a game. They come back. They find a way to fight through it. This is a really good Panthers team. Very resilient, and they are so explosive with goal scoring. Frank Vetrano blowing up the score sheet. Obviously, Barkov and Huberdeau. Lundell's kind of quieted down a little bit, but the Panthers, man, you can't really complain about what they've done so far this year. And that's why at number 2, again, moving from the top spot last week, it's the Carolina Hurricanes. They're on a 2-game losing streak, and that's really the gap between these 2 teams. They go on a 4-game winning streak. You're on a 2-game losing streak. They're 6-3-1 in their past 10 games, but overall, there's no reason to fret in Carolina. I really think this team has really surprised a lot of people, including myself. Tony DeAngelo pretty much taken the role of Dougie Hamilton for a hell of a lot cheaper also, just a little thought. The goaltending's been good with Ranta and Anderson. They're getting the depth scoring. They're getting the scoring from the top guys. What more could you ask for from the Carolina Hurricanes? Everything is firing on all cylinders. There's a lot of good vibes and good juju there in Carolina. And again, they're not number one in our power rankings, but they're still top 5, and they've been that way really now since the beginning of the season. So guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What do you think of our Week 7 power rankings? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know down below. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you again next time.